The intelligence community is launching a new effort to combat Russian interference in U.S. elections. This time, the Department of Homeland Security is warning the Kremlin may turn to ransomware in 2020. Reuters was first to report that, quote, the U.S. government plans to launch a program in roughly 1 month that narrowly focuses on protecting voter registration databases and systems ahead of the 2020 presidential election. Ransomware attacks hold computer systems hostage until payment is made. A technology official telling Reuters, quote, a pre-election undetected attack could tamper with voter lists, creating huge confusion and delays disenfranchisement, and at large enough scale could compromise the validity of the election. Officials say this new DHS program will run parallel with local, state, and private sector efforts to try to keep Russian hackers out of American voting software, attacks that were attempted back in 2016. Here with us to talk more about it, Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI Assistant Director for Counterintelligence, and from Oslo, Norway tonight, Clint Watts, a former FBI special agent. He's also Distinguished Research Fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute and author of Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. Clint, well, speaking of the Russians and potentially, according to this reporting, anyone else who has some desire to interfere perhaps with American elections, ransomware is a potential avenue for doing so. Describe exactly how that would work and what could be done to stop that.
Yeah, there are two parts. If you remember back, Steve, when we looked at the end of the Mueller report, the first part people were worried about was changing votes. So it'd be actually getting in, changing the voting system so that the count came out different. That's actually much more difficult to do. But what the Russians did last time around, and what could be even worse this time, is going after those voter rolls. The way they could do that is by using basically off-the-shelf ransomware that any cyber criminal uses, or other variants which they have used in attacks that are have been connected to them in places like Ukraine. What the idea would be is they would send out messages essentially to parts of the voter registration process. This could be across any of the 50 states. When someone in one of those local governments mistakenly clicks on it, it would seize that data. It would essentially block that out, decrypt it so that they can't access the voter rolls, and then would either require a payment or in some cases may not ask for any payment at all. It essentially takes those voter rolls and basically destroys them. So you can imagine if you're heading into election day and you don't have those voter rolls, you don't know who can vote, and you don't have access to them, it would almost bring the voting day to a halt, depending on which locality got struck by it.
And Frank, the scale of what Clint's describing there, 50 states, but then within the states, you're talking about hundreds of cities, towns, precincts, potentially, where these records are going to be kept. Practically speaking, how do you defend against what Clint's describing?
Well, it's interesting. You mentioned the thousands of municipalities involved in this because they're being hit right now. We have several states and little municipalities in the country right now who are literally being extorted for their own data at town hall. And so this is part of what's driving, in addition to the Mueller report findings and the fact that the Russians did this in 2016 and waved at us and said, we can get into your town hall voter registration. We now have a real-time problem where some towns are being held hostage. And so how do you defend against this? Well, this is where the federal government needs to step in, and they are, at least now, and they're saying, you need backup systems, standalone systems, constantly backing up, making the backup database secure so that if it goes down, you've got a backup system. That costs money. And we've heard Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell say, hey, I'm not supporting the concept of the feds coming in for security on elections because I think elections are about the states. Well, let's play out the worst case scenario. The state, the town, key swing states, they get hit. They look to the federal government for help. The federal government says, we're not helping. And now we don't know what that election outcome is in those key precincts on Election Day.
And Clint, we know, obviously, from 2016, the Russians were very interested in meddling with the U.S. election. So obviously, you're talking about something like this potentially in 2020, all eyes on Russia. But is there anyone else, any other country, any other actor around the world we should be keeping an eye on here?
It could be anyone, Steve. I can't state that enough. We've been focused on Russia, as we should be. But when you look at these ransomware attacks, oftentimes we don't even know where they come from. That's the brilliance of it from cybercrime perspective, is you don't know who the actor is whenever they execute it. And that malware, the ransomware that's being used to target these cities, can be copied and used by any number of actors. So it gives the ability for any country, essentially, that might want to provoke the United States or even lay a claim or some sort of an attack that might look like Russia, or even a criminal or a domestic actor that wants to try and sow confusion or stop the vote, to have the ability to do a psychological attack on this country when we're most vulnerable. We know we have just gone through 2016. So imagine in 2020 having issues again, even when we knew this far out. I have to say DHS has done a good job about notifying on all of this. But look at what they're dealing with. They got to go to 50 different states to get this done. They have, as Frank said, no more resources to get that action done. They need that money from the Senate, and they haven't been able to get that bill through there.
So Frank, Clint says DHS is doing a pretty good job on this. That you've got the president, though, over the weekend making the case for bringing Vladimir Putin back into the G7, saying he'd like to have Vladimir Putin come to the United States next year at the height of the presidential campaign to be part of the G7 summit here in the United States. Those two messages, the signal being sent by DHS, the public signal being sent by the president, how's all that interpreted in Moscow?
Well, it's interpreted as a green light. Essentially, what the Senate is doing, what the president is doing in their posture is saying, look, we're not going to touch this. If you're going to do it again, we're not going to step into this. And so, as Clint said, it's not just Russia we need to worry about. Iran's doing this. China certainly has the capability of doing this. And your independent hackers can just mess with the election. So it's got to be a coordinated federal budgetary item to secure our democracy by preserving a free and fair election. And we're not there yet.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.